Good evening, everyone. I'm Dr. Daniel C. Potts, a local neurologist and the course director for Art to Life, an honors seminar course here at UA. You know, as we look across our lives, all of us can name a few individuals who have truly made a positive impact on our lives. I mean, extraordinary persons who, by measure of their intellect, their character, their integrity, their resiliency, their deportment, have truly brought out our best as human beings. And our lives will never be the same after having met these people. Well, I can honestly say that the next person that you're going to meet tonight has done that for me. I have had the pleasure of being a mentor and her course director over the past several years since she took my class as a freshman. Would you join me in welcoming Zoe Berndt?
Thank you, Dr. Potts, for that incredible introduction. For those of you who don't know me, I am Zoe Berndt, and my revolutionary idea is why you should have your midlife crisis in your early 20s. A little bit about myself before we get started. I am a senior from Cincinnati, Ohio, studying English and finance. I'm the only sister of two brothers. I recently started taking on a bunch of new hobbies because I suddenly learned you're never too old to acquire different interests. You aren't cemented into liking certain activities simply because you've done them for a long time. I've been playing chess, writing letters, and attempting archery, all with various levels of success. At various stages of my life, I've been diagnosed with a lot of different acronyms, among other things. But the whole reason I'm here talking to you all tonight is because of one event. On August 20th, 2020, I was involuntarily committed to the psych ward for suicidal ideation. For those of you who have never been to the psych ward, I'll fill you in that there's no technology allowed. There aren't even clocks in the rooms. I told my nurse on the first night I was there, when asked why I was there, that I was, quote, having a midlife crisis. To which she replied, I sure hope not. And I told her, they will tell you life is short, but I know firsthand it could be tragically short when you hate yourself. So now I'm here and I have to work on it not feeling unbearably long. You see, I'd been spending my entire junior year studying happiness and suddenly found myself in a place where I couldn't do any of the things I had learned. I only got 15 minutes a day for visitors. I couldn't exercise. My food was heavily regulated and my sleep pattern was disturbed every 10 minutes by a nurse. With all these limitations, I got a lot of time, even if I couldn't keep track of it. Enough time to finish 86 sheets of Sudoku, and time to think and reflect. And I came to the conclusion that I needed to find the root of my unhappiness instead of trying to put happy band-aids on top of what was clearly a soul-deep wound. When I started tunneling into myself, I found a lot of feelings I was uncomfortable with and couldn't quite put a name to. That is ultimately what I'd like to talk to you all about this evening. So when I left the psych ward, I committed myself to the unraveling of my neuroses. And what I found at the core of myself was a lot of shame. Well, let's take a step back. Many people get shame and guilt confused and use them synonymously. They're not the same. When you feel shame, you're feeling that your whole self is wrong. Focus is inward. As opposed to when you feel guilty, you're making a judgment that something you've done is wrong. The focus is outward. Guilt actually has an evolutionary purpose because it creates empathy and it allows us to put ourselves in the shoes of the people we may be affecting. It can potentially promote a group's well-being by encouraging us to stick to social conventions and try and stay in the good graces of others. On the other hand, shame often isolates and can actually be counterproductive in promoting socially adaptive behaviors. There are two ways that shame tends to manifest itself. The first is the feeling component of shame, the sad Pepe component, if you will. This is recognizable to nearly all people. It can feel like physical pain at its worst and mild discomfort at its best. There's a sense of being lost in one's own body, a helplessness, a lack of self-esteem, and a feeling for the need to distance oneself from others. The second way shame manifests itself is unconscious. This component doesn't have a cool meme name, but I'm open to suggestions. This unconscious component is what Brene Brown identifies as shame tapes, because these are the thoughts that run on a loop whenever something bad occurs. This belief is deeply ingrained into the way we go about our daily life. A lot of the time, these beliefs can be traced all the way back to something that happened in our childhood. Though negative, these ideas can become core beliefs, or the essence of who we think deep down we are. This thought component can operate cyclically, We often think that we first see ourselves acting in a certain way and therefore conclude that we are a certain kind of person. In the case of shame, we can sometimes follow this pattern in which our actions lead us to conclude that we are unlovable, bad, deficient, lacking. However, with more dangerously and delusional core beliefs, this does not happen. Shame tends to work in the opposite direction. We first assume certain things about ourselves, and then we act in ways that seem to prove our assumptions right in a kind of self-fulfilling prophecy. The important part about this second unconscious belief component is that these things we believe are assumptions, not facts. I think Lemony Snicket put it best when he says, assumptions are dangerous things to make. And like all dangerous things to make, bombs, for instance, or strawberry shortcake, if you make even the tiniest mistake, you can find yourself in terrible trouble. Making assumptions simply means believing things are a certain way with little or no evidence that shows you are correct. And you can see at once how this can lead to terrible trouble. I know so far you're thinking, gosh, when is she going to talk about something a little more upbeat? And can she get back to her revolutionary idea? Well, that comes now, almost. First, we have to talk about the process we can use to break the cycle of shame within ourselves, the controlled crisis we need to create and confront in order to avoid an uncontrolled crisis later. The shame resilience process was first introduced by Brené Brown, following much of her research on vulnerability. And while there's a lot of text here, I promise we can walk through it together. So the first step is simply to recognize the shame when it comes up. I know this is very cliche, but in order to fix a problem, you first have to address that you have a problem. So this will be when you feel certain painful feelings like low self-esteem, helplessness, self-hatred, a feeling of being deficient, being not good enough. So once you're recognizing this, next thing you need to do is to make this feeling conscious so that it can't run your thoughts, words, and behaviors without you even realizing it. You may find this process uncomfortable, but you can reassure yourself that it's only a temporary step in a larger process that will leave you feeling much more comfortable than you did before. It can also be helpful in this step to try and trace the feeling back to the messages that have caused it. A pretty common example would be, I'm constantly seeking the approval of others, and the assumption being, I'm only good enough if people praise me. The third step is to articulate this message out loud or on paper in clear, definitive words. This may seem like a really simple thing to do. However, even the act of articulating the assumption shifts you from a position of powerlessness to a position of power. It takes an unconscious belief and makes it conscious. It makes an unquestioned belief, and suddenly it's questionable and up for debate. The fourth step is to essentially put the assumption on trial. I'll walk you through a quick personal example as we can see how this might be applicable. So step one, recognizing and becoming aware of the shame. So when I was diagnosed with anxiety and depression, I started to feel really low self-esteem and this feeling of being lost within myself. The message that I was then, step two, believing about myself was that I was seeing these diagnoses as a flaw. And when I traced it back, growing up, my mother told me that there was something wrong with my grandmother and that she was evil, but she would always caveat it with she had a mental illness. And so young Zoe kind of put those two things together, mixed up causation, correlation, and thought, when someone has a mental illness, they're evil. Next step is to articulate this message. There's something wrong with me. I'm an evil person. Step four, the most important, is to break this down, put the assumptions on trial. So is this belief true? Maybe. Can I know it absolutely that it's true? No. What happens when I don't believe this about myself? So believing that I'm evil, believing that I have flaws often manifests itself in me avoiding relationships, not wanting to get close to people for fear of corrupting them or causing problems. I know that I would be a much happier and healthier person and a less anxious person if I was able to get rid of this assumption. And so the final part of this step four is to turn the thought completely around. So I'm not evil. My illness is not a flaw or a wrongness I need to hide. Okay, here we are. You've made it this far. And now you're looking for me to tell you how it all relates, how all these tangential stories and tidbits of knowledge and advice culminate. You should have your midlife crisis as early as possible. And the way in which you do this is to learn to articulate your shame and question it. Just as I've shown you, do this process early and often, no matter how uncomfortable it feels, it gets easier. People go 40, 50 years without questioning the unconscious assumptions that they let run their lives. Suddenly they look around at all these things they thought they wanted, sometimes even the people they've chosen to spend their lives with, and they realize those things don't represent or aren't compatible with who they truly are. They were making decisions without ever having confronted or chiseled away at their shame to find their true core. We have a tendency to outwardly compensate for the shame we hold in our hearts. This may invoke images of loud, obnoxious trucks and tiny manhood, but the compensations I'm referring to are much more dangerous. People who haven't wanted to get uncomfortable and dig up the ugly parts of themselves have avoided the issue by bearing their shame with whatever material they can find. They've tried to get us as far away as possible before the bomb of a midlife crisis goes off. But you cannot run from yourself. I will concede that it's extremely difficult to get everything you want in life, unless that thing is to make everyone hate you. Then that thing is extraordinarily easy. And those at war with themselves will always cause collateral damage in the lives of those around them. Divorces, irresponsible financial choices, affairs, a feeling of being overwhelmingly lost within your own life. So confront your shame. Do it now in a controlled, autonomous way to avoid the uncontrolled spiral later. Do it so that when you do meet that special person, they meet the real version of you, not the one that's hiding from itself. Have your midlife crisis early so that you may live an authentic life for the most time possible. It takes work and vulnerability and temporary internal turmoil. But the crisis of self is worth provoking early and approaching head on with the proper tools. Let me be perfectly clear though, this is a battle of critical awareness fought with soft words and a kindness for yourself that you may not be used to. It's a fight not easily won, but kindness, luckily, is a limitless resource. And these hard questions may be some of the most important fights of your life. Thank you.